Welcome back, bakers, to the Kiefer Kitchen. Today we're finishing up our laminated dough products. We're going to be making Napoleon, the fruit band with apricot and frangipane filling, and we're going to work on our croissants. So we're going to make plain croissants, chocolate croissants, and some ham and cheese filled croissants. We have an order of operations to make sure everything is not stuck in the oven at the same time and things have time to proof. So first, I'm going to work on the Napoleon dough. If you remember, I divided your dough into 3 portions, your puff pastry dough. So I took 1 block, so a third of the dough, divided it in half, so that was a very small piece, it's a 1/6 of the dough, and rolled it the size of my parchment. If we were in a commercial kitchen, my parchment would be twice this size. So I had to cut it in half to fit my small parchment, my small pan, and my small oven. So I've got 2 of these rolled out and ready to go. You notice it's going to be super thin. We want puff pastry for Napoleons to be very thin and delicate because the real star of the dish is that pastry cream filling. So I've already rolled out the dough. You don't have to watch me roll out dough. Now I'm ready to dock my dough and get it in the oven. So let me show you how that's done. I'm going to transfer my parchment to my baking sheet and get a fork. In the kitchen we have a nice tool called a docking tool. It's almost like fork prongs on a wheel, and you can roll it all over your dough. They're kind of expensive and the normal home baker doesn't have one, so I'm going to use a fork today. We just poke holes all along our dough. Like I said, we don't want the puff pastry to get super thick because the star is the pastry cream. So adding all of these holes is kind of like scoring your bread. These holes allow the steam to escape without leavening the dough itself. We're also going to place a sheet pan on top of here to really make sure it doesn't rise. If you're having to entertain kids at home, this is a great little project. Just stab the dough, get as many holes as you can. Once it puffs up and bakes, you'll never see all these little holes. So I'm going to add another piece of parchment on top and another sheet pan and pop it in the oven. Puff pastry products usually bake at a pretty high temperature, and that's because steam is our only leavener. So we're going to pop this in about 400, 425. If we were in the convection oven at school, we'd probably be in about 375. And it takes about 20 minutes to get the golden brown color. We're looking for about the color of your rolling pin, or as we refer to it at school, the color of your table. So golden brown, not burnt. It'll be very hard to cut later, okay? Bakers, now we're going to work on our fruit band. If you notice in your notes, it's going to say roll out to about 9 by 14 or 9 by 16. This is about the size of your half sheet pan that you're going to be using at home. It's a half sheet pan at school. So again, I've already rolled out, this is a third of your dough. I've already rolled most of this out to speed things along. I am going to neaten it up a little bit. Don't worry too much about your crazy edges. You do want to keep that rectangular shape, but it's okay if it's a little raggedy on the edge. We're looking for consistent dough thickness, and we gotta have the 9 inches. That part is non-negotiable. So I've got my ruler, your quilting ruler, and the 9 inches width is non-negotiable. You'll see in just a minute we need 3 sections of 3 going on here. So I've got 9 by 15, so I think that's pretty good for this part. Now I'm going to take a pizza wheel and clean up all of my edges. We prefer using a pizza wheel for these things because it doesn't cut and drag like a chef's knife would. By all means, you can use a chef's knife or bench scraper, but make sure you cut and lift. If you cut and drag, we pinch the sides of our dough and it won't puff up and get nice and thick in the oven. It pinches just like your biscuits were pinched with the cutters. So I'm going to use my ruler, make sure I get nice clean edges. So actually you want to go a tiny bit wider. I didn't cut much off, you see? Tiny bit wider than your 9 inches since you want to neaten it up and cut a little bit off. I just do the long sides. Don't worry too much about your short sides. We will have time to trim that up later. So leave those be. Okay, again, I'm going to recheck. I'm almost exactly 9 inches right now, so that is perfect. I'm going to mark my 3 sections. Remember, we always prefer to buy the 18x3 ruler, so the width of your ruler is that 3 inches that you need. And you're going to lightly mark 3 columns on here because we need our filling to go down the middle, and then we braid the dough around it like the picture in your notes. Okay, so this middle section is where I'm going to have my filling. I've already made frangipane and I have apricots draining right now. So you notice in your notes it says use frangipane or cream cheese filling. You guys know I'm a huge fan of almond, so I'm going to use the frangipane. It kind of bakes up light and fluffy like a cake, if you remember back to our tart recipe. And I like that in my Danish as opposed to the creamy cream cheese. So we just kind of evenly spread this out. You can also put it in a piping bag and pipe it out. I find it's a little stiff for that, but if you want to be super neat and super consistent, you can always put it in a piping bag and pipe a zigzag down this strip. So now I'm taking my little small offset spatula, spreading it out. You want to make sure it's consistent from top to bottom, which I'm a little thick. I'm going to take some off. So we're looking for about maybe a 1/4 inch thickness, maybe even a little less, because it's going to poof up like a cake batter in the oven. You do want to make sure your sides are nice and neat, and you'll see just how important that is in just a second when I braid the sides. You don't want a lot of frangipane or fruit oozing out of the sides. So that looks pretty good. Apricots are a classic with this dish, but I have used pears before. You can make pretty much any kind of fruit band. You just don't want your fruit to be too wet. That's the only thing. It'll make your pastry really soggy instead of crispy. So just evenly place these. I like to pick ones that are all the same size. Obviously, you want your customer to be happy no matter which slice they get. And the apricots, they're a little too round. I kind of just break them and flatten them. Try to use whatever's in season. I like these canned apricots because they're pretty consistent no matter what. They're canned, you know, preserved while they're in season. But this can definitely be a dessert that you change up with the seasons and what's available. All right, now the fun part. A side note, if you used a lot of flour trying to roll out your puff pastry, you need to brush that stuff off before you get going because it doesn't really absorb in the baking process. You're just kind of left with white sticky stuff after it bakes. So make sure you try to brush all that stuff off. Okay, now to make everything stick together, I'm going to use some egg wash. So go ahead. This is an easily forgotten step. Egg wash your 2 sides. Doesn't have to be very heavy. We just want a little bit of glue. Okay, now this is the fun part. The next tool I like to use is my chef knife. We're doing the same thing as trimming up our sides. I just find if I use a pizza wheel to cut, I can't quite get all the way to that core like I like. So I do use a chef knife, but I just cut and lift. We're not gonna drag. Okay, we're braiding. We're really just crisscrossing the dough, so don't let the word braiding get you confused. We only have 2 pieces we're working with. I like to keep it simple and make my strips about 3/4 of an inch wide. An inch looks kind of big and clunky, so 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch wide. Okay, so first, I'm gonna start at the very top, and we're just cutting off at about 45 degrees. We're just cutting off this top triangle because we have to have an angled starting point. So I do get rid of it, but don't toss it. We might need some dough to patch up elsewhere. So just set it aside. Okay, I do only work on one side at a time. I measure the first few strips and then I just eyeball the rest, you know, just for consistency and time's sake. Cut your strips. There's no rule as to how many. You just want consistency and uniformity. And you want the other side to match up. Those are the only rules. Gotta have the same amount on both sides so we don't get any weird overlaps. Now, I'm not gonna get rid of this little triangle at the end over here. We want to kind of seal up the bottom like a package so all of our filling doesn't ooze out during the baking process. So what I do when I go to the other side is I cut a few strips and then I kind of make sure they line up with the other side. Make sure we're not getting too far off. It's where I have 15 strips on this side and 27 on the other. Always go back and reference. You notice I'm pushing and pulling straight up with my knife. Do not drag it. Okay, very nice. Now we're ready to start braiding. You notice I'm working on the back of my sheet pan. This is to easily slide it off later. And if I need to pop it back in the fridge or if I wanted to use it on a cutting board. Also, my sheet pan is super cold because I had it in the fridge. You want to keep your dough as cold as possible. Time is not our friend. When it warms up, it's really hard to deal with. So I like keeping it on my cold sheet pan. It gives me a little more flexibility. Now we're going to start braiding, crisscrossing our dough together. So always make sure you actually cut through the dough. I've got some parts where it's a little attached still. Make sure you give it a good cut. There we go. I'm pulling it up. Don't stretch it. Just lift and place. Lift and place. We're just crisscrossing it like a necktie right here, okay? You always want your tails, the bottom right here, to come down the middle. So we make sure we can cover it up with the next strip, okay? I like my fruit to be completely covered. That way your braiding kind of speaks for itself. People aren't trying to look at the fruit and see what's in there. You just label it appropriately. I also don't really like any gaps because I don't want any of that frangipane to leak out. That stuff's expensive and tasty, so we like to keep it in. Oh, and see right there, I kind of messed up a little bit. I did 2 on my left side first. Nope. Left, right, left, right. That's what happens when you talk too much and you're not focusing on the task at hand. Okay. Keep it consistent. Always make sure that your tails are getting covered up by the next piece of dough. It will come unraveled in the oven. And you see, then it almost looks like a fishtail braid. All of the points are coming straight down the middle. Looks nice and neat. Looks lovely. Very impressive after it bakes. So with any puff pastry product, you know, we have all that butter folded in there. We like to refrigerate it before it goes in the oven. My dough is already getting a little too warm. I'm gonna work a little faster. But if we were to put this straight into the oven, the dough would, or the butter would just kind of melt. Instead of keeping its shape, letting the pastry rise, it would just kind of melt and ooze out all over the pan. We don't want that. Okay, so now I'm at the end. It really does look like a fish this way. I'm at the end here. How do we finish up the end? Well, I'm gonna just seal it up like a little package. Usually we chop off the ends and they don't, they're not put in the case and sold to customers. So I'm not really worried about how it looks. I just want to protect the rest of the pastry. So I just fold it over each other, and I need to get some of that filling out and pinch. Make sure it seals up. Usually that little end is a chef snack. That's what we like to say. So for the top over here, I'm going to use those scraps of dough that I had from earlier. I'm going to remove a little bit of that French pan because it's going to just ooze out anyways. Ooze out onto our pan. And add some dough, seal it up like a little package. Okay, looks great. This gets an egg wash, pop in the fridge, and then it gets baked at 400. Remember with egg wash, I'm using whole egg with a splash of water. You don't want it to puddle up in our creases here. So a little goes a long way. Don't oversaturate it. Do make sure you're getting all the way down to the parchment paper, but I don't want to see a lot of puddling where we get scrambled eggs. Yeah, that looks kind of ugly after it bakes. Okay, this looks great. I didn't use much egg wash at all. I'm gonna slide it off my pan, flip my pan over, and get it back on the regular side. You do want to make sure you follow that step, because if any of this does ooze out, we don't want it to roll off the pan into the oven. So make sure you get your pan back right side up. I'm gonna pop this in the fridge and we'll work on our Napoleon. Okay bakers, now I'm going to do some mise en place to get ready to assemble my Napoleon. My pastry is out of the oven now, so I want to work on my icing and get my pastry cream ready. So first I have my powdered sugar measured out, and please always sift your powdered sugar. I know it says it's sifted on the bag, but there's going to be some lumps, and that's the last thing we want for icing. So I'm going to use my sifter. Push the powdered sugar right on through. This is a great basic icing. This is the same icing we put on top of our cinnamon rolls, and we're actually going to save a little bit and drizzle it on top of our fruit band also. Great basic icing. Just powdered sugar, cream. If you don't have cream, you can use milk, some butter, and some vanilla. We do like to have that butter added in there because it will set up a little bit. It makes it stiffer. Makes it a little easier for packaging. Okay. So I'm going to add in my butter, get all that. My heavy cream, and I have vanilla in the cream here. I just want to whisk all that up. Seems like not enough liquid to get all of this powdered sugar incorporated, but I promise it will be great. Mine is looking a little dry. I think I might need to add just a little bit more milk. Remember, go a little bit at a time to get the consistency you need. Otherwise, if you keep adding liquid, you'll have to add powdered sugar and vice versa, and then you'll end up with double the amount of icing than you originally intended. So I like to give it a vigorous whisk, make sure there's no lumps of powdered sugar. We want smooth icing. Okay, so it needs to be spreadable, but it should still fall off of your spoon. Get rid of that whisk and set this aside. Now, I've made pastry cream. This is just the half batch that we normally make, the pint batch of pastry cream. It's been cooling down, but this is a little too dense, and it's not going to be enough volume-wise to make my whole Napoleon. So what I like to do is fold in some whipped cream into my pastry cream. Makes it a little lighter and fluffier, not so dense and rich. Hopefully your guests will be able to eat an entire slice. Okay, so I add my pastry cream to my big bowl, and remember, we're folding. We have air that we've incorporated into our whipped cream, and we want to keep that volume. So I'm only going to add about maybe 2 cups of cream, my pastry cream, and we'll see how that looks. Remember our folding technique, you scoop up and fold over. Scoop up and fold over. Until you don't see any more streaks. And you'll notice the color will lighten up, and it'll just look a lot more light and fluffy. It's exactly what we want. Not just straight vanilla pudding. I think I want it a little bit lighter though. I'm going to add one more little spatula scoop in here. This is really up to your discretion. You can use straight up pastry cream. You might just have to make a double batch to fill up this whole Napoleon pastry. I like using a glass bowl for these activities so I can see if I've mixed everything in. Okay, my light and fluffy pastry cream with whipped cream. Let me get my whipped cream out of the way and bring my pastry over. So my oven is pretty uneven. I got some burnt pieces and some perfect pieces. So this first piece was on the bottom of the oven. You see it baked pretty perfect on this side, and then this end got pretty dark. So we'll trim that off. And this piece was on the top shelf, and it baked almost perfectly. We want that nice golden brown color. These edges are still pretty dark, but overall I'm pretty happy with it. We want 3 layers, so I think I'll get 2 out of this big strip, and I can get 1 layer out of this, okay? So I'm going to move my pastry off of my pan. I don't want to cut on the pan because we have this lip right here. I can't get my knife down and even and cut all the way through. You want to use a serrated knife for this application because we want the teeth to do the work for us. If we were to use a chef knife, we would have to press down way too hard on the pastry to cut through, and we would end up cracking the whole thing. So I like using a serrated knife. The teeth do the work for us. Okay, so again, back to our ruler. We love that 3 inches right here. So that's going to be our guide for how thick the or how wide the short side should be for our Napoleon. You can pretty much go as long as you want, but make sure all of your strips are the same width, okay? So let's see, I can get 1, 2.5. And I'll get a strip over here. Okay. So we do want to neaten up our edges to make sure everything lines up. So I'm barely putting any pressure and I'm sawing back and forth. Sawing back and forth. Let the teeth do the work for you and you'll feel it release. I'm going to switch over to my other knife. I think this will be a little better, a little heavier. Yes. Very nice. You see, and if you look, you can see all those little bubbles in the pastry. That means you laminated your dough very nicely and all that steam released accordingly. Okay. I'm not going to worry about squaring up these ends yet. I want to get my long strips first. Okay. So when cutting the bigger piece, make sure you apply plenty of pressure to your ruler so it doesn't slip and slide around on you. Remember, this is a buttery pastry. I'm using short strokes, sawing right through the pastry. Beautiful. So I've got this nice long strip. It's very delicate. Don't be too crazy. Okay, I want to get one more 3-inch strip. Great. Okay, I've got those 2 strips, but don't get rid of any scraps. What if one of this breaks? We can always put some smaller pieces together to make a layer. Never get rid of your scraps until the dessert is on its way out the door. Okay, now I'm going to work with this not so pretty piece. Okay. Okay, I was able to get the piece I wanted. Now, don't worry too much about your ends right now. Usually we chop those off and they are chef snacks. After I assemble this, I'll put it in the freezer, let it get super, super firm, and then I'll be able to cut it with confidence. So I don't want to assemble my Napoleon on this crummy parchment paper. I do want to transfer my pieces over to a nicer, less crummy area. I'm gonna get rid of this. Okay, so now when looking at your pieces, you're gonna pick a top, a middle, and a bottom. The Napoleon has 3 layers. So I want your prettiest, smoothest layer to be on top. That's the side we're going to spread our icing on. So I think this guy right here is my prettiest, smoothest layer. That's the top. Don't worry about him for now. Now, I want your more ugly layer to be in the middle, and guess what? That's this guy. The middle layer gets ignored. We need a good, sturdy layer for the very bottom, right? Because that's gonna be what transports the pastry from the spatula to the customer's plate. So this, I'm very confident in this piece, that's going to be my bottom, and the not so pretty piece will be the middle, okay? If you were in a pickle and you had a broken piece that you just had to use, it would also go in the middle of this pastry. Okay, now I'm ready for my pastry cream. Got my piping bag here. You could put a tip in to be very, very professional, but I'm just gonna cut the end of my bag off very neatly and go for it. Unless I have got a tip right here. I don't. Remember, never overfill your bag. You do not pipe very evenly if you have way too much in your bag you're trying to deal with. So don't overfill it. Okay, so if you notice the picture in your book, it looks like the pastry cream is oozing out a little bit. I don't want it to ooze that much, but I do want it to go from edge to edge. It will squish out a little bit when we cut it. So start at the very end and go side to side. Nice fluid motion, be even. And I would suggest if you have to stop and re-grip, stop in the middle of a swipe. Don't stop on the very end where the customer will see it. It looks a little bit clunky. And then pick back up when you're ready. And you see I'm kind of hovering above the pastry, makes a nice thick layer. Don't smush your pastry cream, make a very thin layer. Like I said, the star of this dish is this pastry cream filling. That's why people order this. Okay, I went end to end. We may cut off the end, it may be a chef snack, but fill it up for now. Okay, put my not so nice piece right on top of there. You don't need to push down. Remember, we're gonna squish it when we cut it, so don't squish it now. Put some more cream in my bag. And start the process over. Oh, put just enough in my bag to get through that. Okay. Now, we are not going to add the third layer quite yet. We have to decorate it first, okay? So I'm going to kind of set this aside while I decorate the top layer. This is the real showstopper here. So I'm going to clean up my area a little bit. I don't want any crumbs in my icing, so I'm going to clean up all these little crummy bits of puff pastry, get them out of the way. Okay, so now I'm ready to do the decorative part. I do want to get some parchment, offset spatula, my ruler, and I've got some paper cone bags here for my chocolate, the chocolate swirl on top. And that is just ganache on top. Mine might have cooled down a little bit. I might need to microwave it some. If I work quickly, it'll be okay. Okay, so now we're using our ruler for a different task. It's going to be like a large spatula for my top layer. So once we get this all nice and decorated, it's going to be very hard to touch and move. So I'm going to decorate it on this, and then I'll be able to slide it on top of our pastry cream filling, okay? So decorate it on top of your ruler. Make that ruler work for you. Okay, now I'm going to take some icing. You want to add enough to cover. We don't want to keep adding. The more we kind of try to spread it around with our offset spatula, the more likely we're going to pick up crumbs and get crumbs incorporated. And that just doesn't look very professional. So I'm going to drizzle it all down the middle. Oh well, if we get some on the parchment paper, I'd rather have a nice finished product. Okay, so what I want you to do is to be very deliberate and try to get it done in 1 or 2 swipes. Remember, we like to use the whole spatula, so I don't want to see any of this. We use it this way. I like to put pressure on the very end of my offset spatula to give even pressure, but your pastry might slide around. I'm going to do my best to get it all spread out in one even layer. Ta-da. Now I have plenty to add to my fruit band. Now I can tell it's much, much thicker on this side than that side. I'm gonna just thin that out a little bit. And again, don't get too crazy or about details. Once you add that chocolate stripe, you can't see the little ridges in this icing. So give it 1 or 2 good swipes, make sure the pastry is covered, and move on, or else you'll end up getting a lot of crumbs in there. Okay, so now I'm ready to add my chocolate to my bag and make my lovely lines. Yeah, I think that's gonna be good. So a little goes a long way with this chocolate. You don't need to overfill your bag, remember? We fold it over. Make sure it doesn't come out the top. And we're ready to go. Cut a tiny hole to begin with. Make a line on your paper and see if you're happy with that thickness of chocolate. I want mine just a tiny bit thicker. Cut a tiny bigger hole. Okay, very nice. Okay, so you're not used to chocolate and how it comes out of the bag, so do a few practice stripes. We go the length, we go long ways. I know it looks like you've got some zigzags going short ways. We're not doing that. When we drizzle chocolate, we go long, long strips, okay? And make sure you go off of the pastry. We don't want to see any of those little curly hues at the end here. We want it to go all the way off the pastry. So do a few practice swipes. You see I'm using my non-dominant hand to steady my right hand, and I'm almost shifting my weight from foot to foot instead of relying on my arms to do the movement. It's a little more steady when you just shift your weight. So do a few practice swipes. Make sure you have nice straight lines, not squiggly. If you do get squiggly lines, it means you're either squeezing too hard and not moving fast enough, or the opposite. You're moving way too fast and not squeezing hard enough. You'll get squiggly lines and broken lines, okay? If you ever get a clog, the chocolate hardens up at the very end, just use your fingernail and pull it out. Okay, here I go. It doesn't have to be super fast. Whatever speed you are squeezing your bag at determines how fast you move along your pastry. Okay, I'm gonna say that's good. I don't want it to look too busy, because then when we drag our knife through it, it won't look as elegant and defined. Okay, so I'm gonna get my little knife. Now, here's the tricky part. I like to go all one direction and then come back and go the opposite direction in between. So you just press your knife down through the icing and chocolate and slide down. I like to wipe off my knife with every swipe, okay? Leave some space. I like to leave maybe an inch space, and do the next swipe. Wipe off your knife. And you do want to work quickly because the chocolate will begin to set up. And it won't make that nice spider web design. It will start to just break. The lines will just break. You can get as sophisticated or as simple as you want with this. I'm showing you a very classic design here. Okay, I've got a messy hand. Now we're going to come back. I pulled down. I went from north to south. This time I'm going to go the opposite direction in between. So I'm going to start by pushing in the icing and push up. And you'll see what a beautiful, almost spiderweb-like design that is. And I'm just on the verge of not working quickly enough. I can tell my chocolate lines are starting to break. So my chocolate's starting to set up, which is good. It means I made the right kind of ganache. You want it to all set up, but you gotta get those lines done first. Okay, now for the fun part. We're going to transfer our beautiful design on top of our pastry cream stack here. So first step, you do want to clean up your sides a little bit. We've got icing oozing down the side here. Just gonna give it a little swipe. Don't mess up your lines. You don't have to swipe right next to the pastry. You just don't want it to be all over the ruler and just start to fall down the side of your pastry. Okay, then I pick which side am I going to fall from. I like to add, make sure the side away from me goes down the pastry first. So you want to also clean up that side. All the chocolate and icing that we spread on there. Thank goodness for parchment paper. Okay, so now everyone gets nervous at this part. I go ahead and line it up over my pastry and scooch the pastry to the end of my ruler. And I just slowly, steadily push it off the end. And at the same time, I'm pulling my ruler out. Okay? You will get some pastry cream on your ruler, some icing, put it through the dish. Okay, now I'm going to make sure it all just lines up very nicely. Might need to wiggle it around some. Okay, so now we have this huge long pastry. What are we going to do with it? We put this whole thing in the freezer until it's it's nice and firm and we can cut it. That pastry cream firms up almost like ice cream. And I take a hot knife and cut it right down the middle. So then we have two more manageable pieces to work with. So at this point, I will transfer this onto a piece of sheet pan, get it in the freezer, and then cut it for you. So bakers, now we're gonna work on our croissants because those need to proof and then get baked, right? We've got yeast included here, so they need to proof. So let's get those shaped up. I've already rolled out my dough mostly. It's gonna be a full size sheet pan. So it's 2 of my small half pieces of parchment, which I'm almost there, just needs to be stretched out a little bit more. These are very important to work quickly. We've got so much butter in here, it melts quite fast. So just trying to speed it up and roll the dough out a little bit ahead of time to make sure it handled nicely. If you remember back in the first video, I talked about one side did not look as good as the other, and that was going to be the inside of my dough. That is now the top side of my croissants, because I'm going to cut them and then roll them up. So, I'll show you that in just a second. I have created a template. If we were in class, I would have enough for everyone to use, but it's how we cut our dough to make sure we get enough of each flavor. So I really do need to get to the size of parchment paper to make sure I get all the croissants. Almost there, tiny bit more rolling. And just like with the fruit band, we are going to square up the sides. So don't panic if you don't have perfectly sharp corners. We will fix that. Okay, check our size again. That looks good. Okay, so what I'm going to focus on first, if you can see, are these chocolate croissants. So it is 2 long strips that are 3 inches wide. I'm going to focus on those first. So I'm going to fold the paper up so that's all that I look at, my 2 chocolate strips. I'm going to pick my left side over here to work on those first. Get your ruler back out, and we're going to square up our sides. Take off the least amount of dough as you can, okay? You worked so hard for this dough. Don't get rid of too much. If you don't know how to square up your dough, you always pick the shortest part, and that's where your ruler goes, so you don't cut off too much. Make sure it meets at a right angle with the previous side, and your dough will look perfect. Okay, now I'm ready to start measuring. I start with the chocolate croissants first because they're a very different shape than the rest of them. So I like to cut these long, easy strips out of the way, or cut them first and get them out of the way. Remember, your ruler is exactly 3 inches, so just use the whole width of that to get the thickness of your chocolate croissants. So we get 2 of those strips. Ta-da. And move those aside. Whoop, make sure you cut all the way through. I'm actually going to go ahead, since I'm working with limited table space, I'm going to go ahead and roll these up and get them completely out of the way. So today I'm using some Hershey bar chocolate in place of the pain au chocolat. We are fortunate enough to be able to get that at school, but usually it's very hard to find for the basic home baker or at your regular grocery store. So I'm using 2 squares to make a rectangle for my chocolate croissant. I use 2 of them in one big croissant, okay? First, we are going to egg wash and make sure you have a pan ready. Got my pan over to the side here, ready to place the finished croissants. So give an egg wash to the top of the dough. This is our glue, remember? Make sure everything sticks together. We do not want it to come unrolled in the oven. We don't want to lose our filling. Okay. So I like to take 1 chocolate bar and place it almost to the end of my dough. I'm leaving about a 1/2 inch, and I roll it up and press it back down so the dough kisses itself. Add another piece of chocolate. You roll the whole piece over, and then you come back, lift up that first chocolate bar, and cut back a little bit. If we were just to roll the whole thing over and cut all the way up here, it would be double the thickness on one side and not as thick on the other. It almost start to unroll in the oven, and it almost looks a little bit like a sofa or a futon. It's quite funny, but not what you want to serve your customers. So if you see, I've got 1 even thickness layer of dough all the way around my chocolate croissants. Make sure your seam goes down onto the pan. These do expand, so leave room to grow. I'm gonna do this one a little bit quicker because my dough is really warming up. Add your second chocolate bar, fold them both over, but lift up the first and cut. Make sure they kind of meet in the middle, like so. Usually I'm able to get 3 big croissants per strip. We'll see how this one goes. Oh yeah, that is perfection. Just the right amount of dough to get rolled up there. Do this one this way so you can see a little better. Place your chocolate bar about a 1/2 inch from the edge of your dough, roll it over, add another piece of chocolate, roll it once more, pull back, and cut. It matches up perfectly. And we love to put 2 chocolate bars in our croissants, but if you have only enough dough towards the end to get 1 bar in the middle, it's just gonna be a miniature croissant. We make them all the time. Just like that one, I didn't have quite enough dough to wrap all the way around, so it's just gonna be 2 bars, but a smaller croissant overall. Okay, I'm going to set these aside and let them proof. Okay, now I can focus on my big, classic, kind of triangular croissant shapes. So you notice, you can see on my template, I've got 2 rows of triangles here. I want to work smarter, not harder. So I'm gonna cut my dough in half and cut all these triangles at once. You'll see what I'm talking about. So I've got this square right here. We're going to just lift. If you work quickly, your dough isn't so soft. Lift, fold in half. Make sure you try to press down and get a crease right here. And that way you can see where to cut your dough in half. We give that a cut. Now I can lay my dough on top of each other. Make sure it's not sticking to your table too bad. There we go. And stack them on top of each other. This one got a little wonky. I guess I didn't square it off correctly. There we go. Okay, so we're gonna cut 2 sheets of dough at the same time now. Fun. So since I'm only working with 1 set of triangles, I'm gonna fold my paper in half again, so that's all I'm looking at, okay? This is where geometry comes in handy, okay? Don't get confused, you'll end up with not a triangle. We're working with isosceles triangles today. They're going to be 6 inches across the bottom and have height. Their long sides are going to be 8 inches. You only have to worry about measuring the 6-inch part, and everything else will line up. So I usually have a bench scraper or knife around. Fork is what I got today. I'm going to start on one side and go from 0 to 6 and make a mark. And then 6 to 12, make a mark. And then the rest should be up to 18. You don't have to make another mark, it's the end of your dough. Now, to get a triangle on the other side, we have to offset it. So my first measurement will be halfway at 3 inches, right? So to connect the dots and make a triangle. The first measurement is 3 inches, and then we move on to 6. So it's going to be 3, and then 9, and then 15. Hopefully it all lines up now. Now we're just connecting the dots. So we start at our first corner over here where 0 was and go to 3. I always use my ruler for this part because I just can't cut a straight line. So I pop my ruler down, use my pizza wheel. Give it a good press. You want to make sure you cut through both pieces of dough. Then we change angles, go from the piece we just cut and come down to our next dot. So we're going to have 2 half triangles on the side here. We can smush them together and make a big croissant. And then we have our first set of beautiful, perfect croissant triangles. Okay? I'm going to work a little faster and connect the dots. Okay, so by all means, I like to roll these up and they're kind of miniature croissants. Please don't throw these away. You worked very hard for that dough. Please eat them. We're going to roll them up and eat them. I like to use about half for ham and cheese and half for plain. I've only made enough ham and cheese filling today for 3 big croissants. That's all I'm going to do. And the rest will be plain. So let's talk about our filling really quick. These are ham and cheese chubs is what they're called, C-H-U-B-S. A chub can be anything that's in this shape and is a filling for a pastry. Vegetarian students usually like to do spinach and feta chub, and we just make sure we mold it in this shape so it melts properly inside of our croissant. You notice you have the recipe in your notes. It's just, I took some deli ham, cream cheese. I had mozzarella instead of Gruyere, so mine has mozzarella in it, some Dijon mustard, and a little bit of salt and pepper. Remember, your ham is going to be salty, or if you put something like Parmesan in here, it's going to be salty. So hold back on that a little bit. Everything is cooked in here. You can taste it for seasoning and see if you like it. And these are absolutely delicious. So I'm going to do 3 of these. Let's work on those first. So I like to pick my biggest ones. Yes, we measured. Yes, I hopefully cut correctly. But some, we're still human. Some are going to be bigger than others. I think these are pretty big. And this one is. Okie dokie. So we have our egg wash. Oh, I need to get my pan ready. So we're going to brush the inside. The top becomes the inside. So brush the top. Not only is our egg wash glue, but it makes your pastry golden brown in the oven. No one wants to see a very light color croissant. We like them golden brown. Okay, so now I'm going to place the chub about 1/2 inch from the bottom of my triangle here, and we roll it around. It usually gets 1 roll. So it's just like a pocket for the filling to sit in. We have our edges over here that act like a shelf. We want those to be flat on our pan so it catches all of the filling that wants to ooze out. And it will want to ooze out, but we want to be able to eat all of that or serve it to our customer. So make sure it sits flat like this on your pan, and we always tuck the tail under. Otherwise the whole thing will come unrolled in the oven. So place your chub, give it 1 roll around. And I just like to, for good measure, to make sure that tail is stuck on the bottom. So I give it a press, make sure the egg wash sticks, and place it nicely on our pan. Okay, that's a big one. That's a whole meal for someone. Okay, so again, and before these proof, I do like to egg wash. Same with the chocolate croissants. I'll have to go back and egg wash those. Give them some egg wash because it's a very rich dough. After it proofs, it'll be way too delicate. The yeast gets very active since it has all those sugars and fats to eat on. It's way too delicate after it proofs to try to drag a brush over it and egg wash. We usually end up puncturing the dough. So egg wash before proofing. Now on to the classic plain croissants. These are so much fun, they're so easy, they always look impressive. So just like our ham ones, I do like to give a little egg wash on the inside, make sure everything sticks together. Make sure if anything's exposed, it'll be golden brown and delicious. And just like puff pastry before, if you had too much flour when trying to roll this out, make sure you dust it off. It's not going to do you any favors in the baking process. So now, to fold your croissants, we do want it kind of tight when we roll it, but don't roll it too tight because it still needs to grow as it proofs. So, a few little aesthetic things. We do like the tail to be tucked under, just like the ham and cheese croissants, but also I might have to adjust where the shelf is. So where these flat pieces, these fins, there's no technical word for it, where they sit on the pan. I like mine flat, instead of being rolled out like this. So you might have to do a little adjusting with your crescent as you roll it up and lay it on your pan. So I'm adding very little pressure, but I'm making sure it doesn't just go wild and loose when I roll. Okay, so this tail tucked under nicely, but my sides are kind of wonky. I'm gonna just turn that flap up and turn this one up to make sure it sits nice and even and bakes evenly. So there's several ways you can kind of pan up your croissants. You could leave it straight, it's kind of boring. We like to usually curve our croissants in a crescent shape. It looks a little more fancy, takes up more room in the case. Your customer thinks they're eating more. Another thing I'm going to show you, if you've been to a fancy deli, you've probably had the option to put your sandwich on a croissant for lunch. So they kind of make it more into like a hamburger bun portion. Let's get all these egg washed first before I roll. Okay, so you're gonna do the same thing, roll it up, make sure that tail is tucked in nice. But when we deal with these flaps, I'm gonna bring it all the way in and connect them. They're kind of like crab claws. I'm gonna bring them all the way in and smush, make sure they are connected. And then when it proofs, kind of fills in that hole in the middle and bakes more like a bun. So that's another way you can form them. One of my favorite things to do growing up was to get some cinnamon sugar and put it in between the crescent and roll it. It's a great little breakfast trick. But plain is always king for me. Put some extra butter on there. Not like we don't have enough butter in here. Delicious. So you want to work with quickly, get it rolled up and on your pan. You remember it's proofing the whole time it's sitting out here. So I got these little guys. What the heck are we going to do with them? So I do like to kind of stretch it out so it's still more of an isosceles triangle instead of that weird right triangle. And roll it up, give it a little egg wash so everything sticks. Roll it up just like the other ones. It's going to be a whole different proportion. It's going to be way thicker and shorter, but they're great little snacks. These are only going to proof about 10-15 minutes as compared to other items you've baked, which are 20 to 30 minutes. This is such a rich dough. If we were to proof it that long, it would end up overproofing and all of those air bubbles would just collapse in the oven. So we almost underproof these rich doughs a little bit so they have more structure in the oven. Okay, here's my hodgepodge of croissant shapes. Make sure you give that a good egg wash. These are a little bit harder because you've got some curves, nooks and crannies. Remember, we just don't want any puddling. Make sure you get everything covered, but we don't want it pooling on there. Okay. I Hi bakers, so all of my products are out of the oven now. My oven could have been a little bit hotter. I think my fruit band could have used a little more volume, but it's overall pretty good products. I want to show you my Napoleon that's now out of the fridge. It was nice and stiff, like I said. The pastry cream really firms up in the fridge, and I got a nice clean cut here on the edge. And this is about the amount of Napoleon we would sell at the bake sale. This is what's appropriate to have in a case to sell. Probably get about 6 servings out of this. But yeah, overall, very neat and clean, very impressive for your friends. Store in the freezer until you're ready to use it, and it thaws out really quickly. Now I'm going to focus on my fruit band. You can see I got some oozing of my filling with the fruit band, so it burnt a little bit, which is very typical. Even at school, the filling will burn in the oven. But don't worry, we're going to cut all of that away. So I'm going to cut that away and I'll show you what it looks like. Again, I like to use a serrated knife. The teeth kind of do the work for us, and we don't have to squish our pastry as much. And just like our fruit tart lab, we like to glaze with a neutral glaze or an apricot glaze. What you find most in the grocery store, most home bakers like to use, is apple jelly that's been thinned out. Use that as a glaze. I don't have any of that today. It's only for my family, so I'm not going to worry about it. But at this point, you would take a brush and glaze your pastry. It looks very nice and professional after I cut away all the burnt stuff. And I'm going to use some more of our icing from our Napoleon and really give it some nice finishing touches. You can use a paper cone bag or a plastic piping bag. Just like with our cinnamon rolls, we like to go at an angle and go quickly. We don't want to see a lot of squiggles. We want to see nice straight lines. So I'm going to go really quick and show you the finished product. And we're not cutting calories when we eat a Danish, so get some icing on there, right? Okay. So that's about the amount of icing I like to put on my pastry. So to serve this, normally we would cut off about the last 1/2 to 1 inch, just to where our braid starts to look really nice and the pastry is even width. And now this would be about, just like your Napoleon, about 2 products of a serving. So let me get my spatula and show you what the inside looks like. Oops. You can see we've got a layer of filling, and you can see your bright orange apricot in there. Again, like I said, my oven should have been probably a little bit hotter. We like to see a little more volume, a little more height with our fruit band, but this is still going to be very delicious and 10 times better than anything you buy at the grocery store. So, okay, let me wipe off my knife and talk about croissants. Again, I think my oven should have been a little bit hotter, but overall, I'm pretty pleased with what was baked. This is our lovely, huge ham and cheese croissant. You see we got some nice color on the bottom. We like that golden brown color. And it's not floppy or falling apart in my hands. It keeps its shape. It should be on the verge of like an open-faced sandwich. This should be someone's lunch. All of our ham and cheese goodness melted out, but was caught on the shelf of our croissant. So we kept all that filling in there. The customer's gonna be really happy. Ham and cheese. Our chocolate croissants, here you can really see the layers. It proofed really nicely and baked lovely in the oven, and our seam barely popped open. We don't have a lot of burnt chocolate. The chocolate didn't ooze out. Overall, very good result. Now, the plain croissants were a little hit or miss. I think I overproofed them. So most of them did come out very nice with the tail tucked under. Very nice and golden brown. This is the color we really, really like on our croissants. But some of them came apart. Some of them, the tail flew apart in the oven. And the reason I think my oven wasn't hot enough is because it continued to proof in the oven. Instead of just baking and setting the outside, it's kept growing in the oven. So that's what caused the tail to slide up from the bottom and unravel. So still equally delicious, but I wouldn't put this in the case to sell to my customers. So let's cut into one. Oh, and here's my cute little miniature croissant, delicious. Let's cut into one and see if we have some good layers in here. Oh yeah. So this is the plain croissant. You can see we've got the nice swirl in there. It's still hot and steamy. Nice swirl of all of our layers. Let's open up a chocolate croissant now. My favorite. Wonderful. Oh yeah, you can see some volume in that one. Got some air pockets in there, but we still have our delicious chocolate trapped in there. Probably could have used one more square of chocolate. I like a little more chocolate in mine, but I'm a chocolate lover. Still a very, very good product. I would definitely put this in the case. Another critique or evaluation you can give your baked goods: are they golden brown and crunchy on the outside, but still cooked on the inside? That's another evaluation of your oven temperature. This is nice and moist, but it's completely cooked. So nice moist croissant on the inside. With all of these products, you can freeze them and they keep very well until you're ready to enjoy them, bring them out, thaw them out. The fruit band can be eaten at room temperature. Napoleon likes to stay cold. Obviously, we've got dairy in there. And your croissants can be refreshed in your toaster oven or at a medium oven temperature. All right, so that is your laminated dough products. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'm gonna find someone to give all these pastries to.